Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week 4 security week session for DevToberfest. In today's session, we want to really focus on the coding challenge for this week. The coding challenge that we have prepared for you is both a combination of ABAP and Cloud Application Programming Model Node.js. And what we have is two projects in each of those environments that have some security flaws that we want you to fix and learn about how to avoid security problems by fixing them. In today's live stream session, I want to go through a little bit of the mechanics of how you can take part in the security challenge, some tips and tricks for tackling either of the two parts of the challenge, either the ABAP or the CAP, or both if you want to do both, and then really spend a little bit more time going into the cloud application programming model side, maybe even doing part of the challenge with you here on the live stream today to help you get started. So feel free to ask questions as we go along. I'll kind of keep I'll keep an eye on the chat as well, and if you have questions that pop up, I'll try to answer them as we go, either about the coding challenge in particular, how it works, or about the topics that we're going to cover here, either the ABAP or the cloud application programming model ones. I will warn you, I've got a brand new pair of glasses. I just got them late last night, and it's my first pair of glasses with bifocals. Probably not a great idea to try them out here doing a live stream, but I'll do my best to visually switch between the monitors here and keep an eye on the chat. With that, let's go ahead and look at the coding challenge itself. So first of all, you can get to this from the DevToberfest page, and maybe I'll just back up here and go to DevToberfest 2021, or the home of DevToberfest. And if you were to come down here, we are in week 4, the security week. And if you drill into the security week, we of course have the various presentations on the different days. And still some coming up, the one we're in now, the one tomorrow on container security, the Fun Friday activity, which is our gaming night. But there is there's a coding challenge. Oh, well, this hasn't been updated. I'm going to have to update this. I'll tell you what. Why don't we update this live right here on the stream? I should have put a link. I know I put a link over there. I wonder how that got lost. So the coding challenge details be reviewed here. I'm like fixing your documentation on the fly during a live stream. There we are. So now we have a link to the coding challenge, which is what I was expecting when I went down there. So for the week 4 coding challenge, it's actually a separate repository. Click on it. It will take you to another SAP samples repository. This is the DevToberfest 2021 Security Coding Challenge. And this has all the details about the coding challenge, what the content is. We'll go over all this here interactively in the session, and some tips and tricks on how to get started, how to submit your submission to the coding challenge once you're done. But all that's here. But let's kind of walk through this and see what we have. This is a starting repository. It has both the instructions, as we've seen, but it also has some content to get you started. As I said, I've prepared some code that has security flaws in it, that the challenge for you is to fix those flaws. And I did a mono repo that has both a Cloud Application Programming Model project in it, and it has ABAP content in it. Now, I also set up in the root of the project, configured it for ABAP Git, and I've set up ABAP Git so it will ignore, the basic configuration files, but it ignore the CAP project. So you can safely clone this entire project using ABAP Git into your ABAP system. I designed it for the ABAP trial on the BTP, so the ABAP on the cloud. But you can safely clone that into your own system or your own trial instance, and it won't bring the CAP content along with it. So it'll just bring the ABAP content. The ABAP content itself is all here in the SRC folder. If you want to just tackle the code challenge without even bringing it into an ABAP system, which should, in theory, be possible, you could just work on these ABAP classes. Now, we'll look at this more in a minute because I'll bring this up in the IDE as well. But before we get into the details of the ABAP session, I just want to show you that there's also a CAP folder. And inside this CAP folder, there is a whole Cloud Application Programming Model Node.js project. It's a very basic project. I took the wizard. I actually used just the sample content, so the bookshop content, to get us started with the data model, because the actual data model and the OData service, which is also here in the SRV folder, what you see here, the service, not that interesting, not that important to what we want to do here. It doesn't really matter what your data model is. You could change this if you wanted. But our goal here is to really put security in place for this CAP project. And I put some getting started. There is a server.js with a basic bootstrap where you're going to have to extend that with some additional functionality. But, like I said, bare bones CAP project. But we have some recommendations of some things that you'd want to add to it. Add CORS processing so you can test it directly without an application router. Add authentication to your CAP service, because currently there is no authentication, no connection to the UAA. Add access control to your CAP service. Add instance-based authorization. That's row level checks. Actually, that's a misspelling there. It's a role level. That should be row level checks, and add content security policy, or anything else that you want to add to it that improves the security of this basic project. Each of these sections, like add authentication to your CAP service. I put a link to some suggested reading that you probably want to go through before you try to tackle this if you don't already know how to do some of these things. So it's not necessarily meant to be, a challenging puzzle, but more of a learning activity. If you've not explored some of these aspects of adding security to the cloud application programming model, this will give you an opportunity to do so. All right, so that's our overview of what all encompasses the coding challenge. So what you're going to want to do to start the coding challenge is you don't want to make changes directly to my repository. You won't be able to. You need to start by forking the repository. So you can just come up here you can use the command line Git tools as well if you're more comfortable with that. But if you're kind of new to GitHub in general, then you can just come up here and click on the fork button, and we'll ask you into which organization would you like to fork this. Now, you may have others. I belong to several different organizations here, but I want to fork it into my private organization. That's where I want to work on it. So I'll just go ahead and choose that, and it will take a couple seconds, and basically it's taking a copy of the project and putting it in my own organization. So now I have the Oktoberfest 2021 Security Coding Challenge repository with all its content, and you can see that it was forked from this origin, but now I've got my own local copy that I can work on. Nice, relatively new feature is if you fork this, say before I make some changes, I only change the documentation, but you can refetch from the upstream and it will pull any changes in from the template project. That shouldn't really be necessary unless I would find some bug in my original template project. You shouldn't need to fetch from the upstream, but you can continue to work on this. Now let's talk about the ABOP side of this for a minute. Oh, and I see Mary's put the link in the chat. Thank you, Mary. It's very nice. So, um, but let's talk about the ABOP side of this first. So I've forked it, and now I could clone my fork into my ABOP system. I'm not going to go over the details of how to do that. We have some tutorials online. If you've not used ABOP Git before, you go read the ABOP Git website. It has some great documentation on that as well. I've already brought it into my Steampunk system, so let me just bring that over from my other monitor. Actually, I have the solutions. Well, my solutions, which I'll release next week after the coding challenge is over. Which I'm not saying that's the only way to fix these problems, but I'll share my solutions as well next week. What we want to look at here. Let me just make this a bit bigger. You can have a look at the code on your own, so it's not so important the key of the code. Each of these security problems, and there's 3 of them in the ABOP section of the coding challenge, and you can choose to tackle one of them, all of them, however many you want. I tried to keep it simple and self-contained, and in doing so, it kind of had to not fake, but I didn't want to deal with input parameters, right? And having to set up a UI and bring data in through that. But that's really what we want to simulate, because in all 3 of these situations, we're dealing with some dynamic SQL. Because when I sat down to try to find a way to have security problems in ABOP, it wasn't really all that easy, to be honest, which is a good thing. Security is just so baked into the ABOP environment. It's really hard to write vulnerable code, to be honest. And the main place where I saw the opportunity for vulnerabilities is when you are dealing with dynamic code, dynamic SQL, and then of course, if you don't check things properly, you can have problems like SQL injection. And this first problem, we'll just look at it in detail. Imagine that this constant is not a constant, that it would be coming in as some sort of input parameter. Because obviously you could fix this program simply by changing the value of the constant, but that's not really the purpose of what we want to do here. So assume this is an input parameter that you need to check dynamically at runtime, that we only hard-coded this as a constant in order to make this exercise easier to accomplish. And what you see here is we have a constant value, and we're doing that in a dynamic update where we're saying set, and we're setting it dynamically, seats max, and we're expecting a value to come in to that input parameter. And if that value was simply a numeric value, well, this would work fine. It would set the seats max, and it would raise or lower it to the value 142. But you see what someone was devious in the input parameter. They said, well, I'm betting this person isn't checking for SQL injection, and I'm going to go ahead and put a comma in here and add another value. I know I'm going to guess maybe that there's a column named price, and I'm going to set the price to 1, and basically set it to virtually free. And obviously, I don't want wherever my application updating the price as well. I only want to update the seats max, but somebody could abuse the program by injecting extra columns and values into this input parameter, and because it's dynamically updating, it would update the other column as well. So very similar challenges are very similar problems in the other part of the ABOP challenge. Here we've got a dynamic where condition, and then finally a dynamic table. And how can you restrict, in this case, how can you restrict access to make sure that someone isn't reading from any table in your database, but can narrow that down? In each of these challenges, they are designed and tested on Steampunk, the ABOP in the cloud. They were done on the free trial. Currently, though, if you've not signed up for the free ABOP trial, it's only available in the in the US 10 region. So if you are signing up for the trial for the first time to do this code challenge, make sure that you create either create your trial account in the US 10 or create another sub account in US 10 in order to get access to the ABAP trial. And you see I'm doing selects from the demo model. I do have a link here to the demo model, which should be installed in the trial systems automatically for you. But if you want to, say, do this coding challenge in an on-premise system, there is an on-premise version of this demo model. If you come here and have a look at it, this is the ABAP flight reference model, but the most recent version. And I think, yes, there are branches in this for the steampunk version, the BTP cloud version of ABAP, but there's also different versions for the various on-premise versions. So you can import this there as well, and maybe with a few minor adjustments. Also, oops, lost my window. Run it in the on-premise world. Now you might have to obviously adjust some of the fixed values. In some cases, I want to select just a single record or update just a single record. And if you ran the data generator in your system, your values might be slightly different. So you might have to adjust the carrier ID or the connection ID to match up to a record in your system if you're going to test this directly. All right. Hopefully that gets people started on the ABAP side of the challenge, if that's what you're interested in doing. That's pretty straightforward. Like I said, even if you just wanted to, you could, in theory, even just come here in your branch and go to the ABAP classes and even change the code right here and fix it. You obviously wouldn't be able to run the code to test it, but you could probably fix these simple coding challenges even right here in the GitHub view. The rest of the time, I actually want to focus on the Node.js CAP side, but there will be one other little thing that I want to show you here about ABAP here in a second. But let's assume that you want to do the cloud application programming model side of the coding challenge, and same project. Just you're going to be working in the CAP folder of this project. And of course, you could now clone this locally and open the project in Business Application Studio or in Visual Studio Code locally, and install the dependencies for the project, and then go about working with it, adding the content, testing it, and whatnot. But I want to show you another cool feature that we've added to this repository to take advantage of code spaces as well. Another option for you to be able to do the code challenge and maybe get started a little easier, particularly if you aren't that familiar with doing CAP development. Maybe you don't already have a local setup done, and you don't necessarily want to install Node.js and all the supporting extensions in VS Code and stuff like that. What we've done is we've used a dev container configuration. So if we look at this real quick, what this is two things. It's a Docker file that will configure a Docker image so that you can run this project and develop it in an isolated development container. And all the definition of what you need for this development container is self-contained in the project itself. It specifies which version of Node.js that you want the container to have. It pre-installs the Cloud Foundry CLI tools. It even installs some other tools, the SQLite tools, and then it goes ahead and pre-installs some global Node.js modules, like the Cloud Application Programming Model Development Kit, some of the Fiori and Cloud Application Programming Model generators for Yeoman. I even go ahead and install the MBT, the MTA build tool, TypeScript if you want to do TypeScript development, and I install the HANA CLI. Since it's a CAP project, you might want to connect it up to a HANA database, and you already have the HANA tools installed there to be able to do that. Although to do the coding challenge, it does not require a connection to the HANA database. You could test the whole thing locally with SQLite if you wanted to. Now that's half of it. That configures the Docker environment, the image itself. We have a second file called a devcontainer.json. In this devcontainer.json, what we're able to do is configure our VS Code environment. And what this is going to do is it's going to pre-install extensions into VS Code and configure certain ports that will be opened automatically in VS Code for testing. And what it has allowed me to do is for you to help you get started is I've chosen some of the VS Code extensions that I thought would be helpful for CAP development, like the SAP supplied CAP VS Code extension, the Fury extension pack. But then there's some other here that I think are just helpful, such as the SQL tools or the version lens. But I also installed Lars's VS Code ABAP syntax plugin in case you might want to do the ABAP coding challenge, but you don't have access to an ABAP system or want to do it standalone, maybe without testing, but you'll still get nice syntax highlighting and some code hinting thanks to this extension, but you can do it completely in a web browser, as we'll see here in a second. So that's the configuration that makes this possible. But if you want to do this if you want to take advantage of this dev container as a code space, you can just click on the code button here in GitHub, and you can say, well, let's create a new code space. And it will start the configuration. There it is. It's setting up my code space. And this will take a minute. We want to give it some time to do this. And I'll explain a little bit of what it's doing along the way. That's why I wanted to show you the configuration files. Normally, if you want to do local development, on your laptop with VS Code, you would need to install a Node.js runtime, and then you would have to go install certain Node.js modules, global modules, into that Node.js runtime. At the very least, you would need the Cloud Application Programming Model Development Kit, which is the command line tooling, which also has the wizards and things like that built into it. And then there's probably other utilities that you'd want to install, like maybe the UI5 tooling. If you're going to build your project, you need the command line tool to build. If you're going to deploy to Cloud Foundry, then you need the Cloud Foundry CLI. And that can take you a couple hours to maybe get all those parts and pieces installed on your local machine. And then you have to keep them up to date. Has there been an update recently? Do I need to update my local copy of that? The nice thing about what we're getting here is all that was predefined, what I need to do this particular project with all tools in those configuration files that I just showed you. And now what's happening behind the scenes is creating this code space is it's building a container that will run in the cloud that already has all that configuration built into it. And I'm not going to have to install anything on my local machine. You'll see here in a minute when it finishes building the container, is I will be able to either run that container in a web browser with a browser-based version of VS Code, or I can open my VS Code desktop, but instead of developing locally on my own file system, my local version of Node.js, it will connect remotely to this code space, and I'll be developing against that code space. So particularly, I think this is really useful in a learning environment where we can remove that barrier of, oh, I need to install 10 things to get started with my learning journey, and instead drop you right into an environment that has everything completely pre-installed for you. Now, this setting up the code space, you only have to do this the first time. Then your code space is persisted, and the next time you come in here, you can start it up, and it takes maybe 10 seconds to start up as opposed to the minute or two that we're seeing here. You can even see that the container is pretty far along now, that it's now installing all the global Node.js packages. It's installed the HANA CLI, the MBT tool, TypeScript, all the SAP supplied modules. Yeah, it takes just a couple more seconds. We're really close to being done. I'm stretching for a little bit of time here while we let it finish up. We'll be finished here in just a moment. And hopefully very soon here. There we are. It's almost finished now. Now it's starting the Docker image. It's mounting it. Now it's connecting us to it. And here we are, browser-based version of VS Code. You choose what theme you want. I like a dark theme. And I can make it a little bigger in the browser here as well. Now it's pre-installing all the VS Code extensions that I specified for this particular environment. And that takes just a second to finish up. You can tell that it's installing VS Code extensions because the little wait clock on that icon. You can actually come over here and even watch it installing them as we go. You can see they're being installed into the code space. There we know the Fiori tools are now installed into this space because I got the pop-up for the help there. And it looks like it's all done. So with me basically doing nothing, other than asking for a code space and being a little patient while it built all that, it has built my entire development environment, not just the image on the back end with the tools like the CF command line. I come here and do a CF help. See, my CF command line is here now. The HANA CLI is installed as well. I didn't have to specify any of that, but also I've got all my extensions that whoever created the project for me specified and thought I would need, like the ABAP syntax and the cap tools and stuff like that, already installed without me having to do anything. So let's go back here. Now, real quickly, I want to go back to the ABAP topic just to show you, because I think this is pretty cool here. Is if you wanted to do the ABAP development, because we specified in the configuration of our dev image that we wanted to also install the ABAP syntax highlighting for ABAP from Lars. When I open the ABAP class that is part of my project, I have nice ABAP syntax highlighting. Now, you can't execute this here yet. At least there's no connection to an ABAP backend. There are some other community extensions that are kind of beta-y status that I guess you could say that work pretty well, that you could maybe connect up to your Steampunk system and use as well. But as simple as these coding challenges are, fixing a few lines of code with the syntax highlighting, even without being able to execute them here, you could probably even try to tackle the code challenge in a web browser, just doing your ABAP code right here. So, if you don't want to go through the trouble of bringing the code into a Steampunk system or your local ABAP system, you could open it in a dev space and have a pretty good ABAP development experience right here. Okay. But what we want to focus on for now is the CAP project, right? So let's just see what we have here. I'll change directory into the CAP project. The CAP project's cloned. Now, the only thing that we have to do, we've installed all the global tooling for our CAP project, but before we can run it, it does have its own local package JSON, of course, and you still, and I've got it all pre-configured here to run with SQLite and should be pretty much ready to go. I think the only thing you would want to do is you want to do in the CAP project, you'd want to do an npm install to install just the dependencies for that CAP project. There we are. And now we can go ahead and do an npm start, and that will do the cds run command. And you can see that we're running just against the SQLite database, but already I'm able to test here. So your application is running on port 4004. In the configuration of the dev space, I did specify which ports are open, 3010 and 4004. You can add additional ports if through your security configuration you want to add an application router or something like that. You would add that to the port configuration here of the space if you want to test that. Now we can go ahead and open this in another tab, and does the routing back to our dev space. Even though it's running in the terminal localhost, we're able to test it here in the web browser as well. And just to sort of prove to you that everything's working right, there we are. Like I said, the starting project is just the bookshop with 2 records. The actual data and data model isn't necessarily the interesting part of what we want to do here. It's the action of adding security to this project that we're really interested in. So that's a quick way to get you started. Let me just show you here as well. Let me go back. I have code space. I could also say open code space in VS Code, which is kind of interesting. Let's see. It'll probably open on my other monitor. Give it a second here. Open in my other monitor. Let's go back to the main page. Now that we have a code space, we can go back into the existing code space. And yes, open the code space in VS Code. There we are. Yes, I do want to open it. And it did open on my other monitor, so give it a second. Show you what's going on here. So what we see, I'll just give this a minute to fire up as well. My local instance of VS Code, connect here, there it is. There we are. And setting up a remote connection, fetching the code space. So I didn't clone this project to my local file system. I simply started, as you saw, from the web browser. I said, open it instead in VS Code. It launched VS Code. This is connecting remotely to that same code space running in the cloud. But it's also done the same thing. It's created a code space based installation of additional extensions that are only going to be specific to when I'm running this code space. So I brought that same configuration into my local version of VS Code, but haven't overwritten my global VS Code configuration, but supplemented it, but only when I'm connected to this remote code space. And I had the same capabilities here. Let me just go ahead and take this full screen and make it a little larger as well. Hopefully everybody can see that good there now. Likewise, I could do my ABAP development. Now this is in my, once again, I'll just show you for sure here. This is my local installation of VS Code that I'm connected to the remote there. And of course, if I change something, I still have my Git source control, and then I can send those changes back. We'll do that here in just a second. Let's go into the cat folder. Let's open a terminal. And the terminal is not running on my local machine. I'm remotely connected to the terminal that's running in the cloud as part of the code space. So I haven't needed to install Node.js or any of the additional tooling. I haven't even ran, I ran the npm install in the browser-based version, which installed all the dependencies in the code space container. And now, without running npm install again, I'll just prove to you. Let's just do an npm start. If I'm in the right folder, sorry. Now let's do an npm start. And my project started up, and it's running remotely, but now I'm testing locally. Well, in my local version of VS Code, right? I can do the same thing here. I can open it in a web browser, and look, it's even going to 127.0.0.1. It's going to my local host, but then that's routing remotely to the execution in the code space dev container running in the cloud, not on my local machine. So I haven't had to go through any additional setup or configuration on my local machine to make any of this happen. So if you have a lockdown machine, if you just want to get started with CAP development, maybe you've never done CAP development, maybe I've got some people interested in the ABAP code challenge, but now that they've watched this, they're like, oh, maybe I'll try the CAP as well, because I can get started really easily here, and I don't need to do a lot of extra stuff. So hopefully that's intriguing to everybody. So that's the getting started. I hope that makes everybody comfortable, and of course, if you don't want to use the code spaces, you don't have to. That's there to make things potentially easier for you. Like I said, you could take that same repository, you could clone it into the Business Application Studio and do your development there. You could clone it locally and open it in a traditional manner in Visual Studio Code, as long as you have all the other dependencies installed, the node runtime and the development toolkit and things like that. If you're already set up for CAP development locally, then by all means, continue to do it that way. This is just another option that you have here to get started, particularly in this learning kind of approach. But let's actually do one of the challenges here for the coding challenge, to give us a chance to walk through a little bit of what we might want to do. Let's go. Let's close a couple of these windows. Let me actually go back here to my coding challenge. What for CAP were some of the things that we wanted to do? Well, one of them is we want to add CORS processing for when the CAP service is used directly without an application router. And I got a link here where you can read more about what CORS is, cross-origin resource sharing. And this is basically, I'm not sure why why the page is in German. Did I put a link to the German documentation in there? That's interesting. I guess for all my German audience, they probably feel right at home. For the rest of us, we probably want that in English. I'm not sure how I got a German link in there. But CORS allows, it's a browser protection that keeps, when it sees a URL from a backend service request that doesn't match the URL of the front end that the user is connected to, it's meant to protect them and say, we don't want you secretly going to perhaps a malicious website with a foreign URL that the user doesn't know about. You think you're trusting the site that you're connected to, and instead you're really being redirected to who knows what behind the scenes. So the browser automatically rejects those requests or makes a special security policy request to see if that's allowed. Does the main page allow that? Is the service allowed to be called from a different URL? And this is all controlled by something called CORS. Now, one of the interesting things is, up until very recently, the cloud application programming model by default did not have any CORS configured. So that meant if you were testing locally, that probably wasn't an issue. But if you wanted to, say, a common way that people run into this is they want to deploy their CAP service, their Node.js OData service, and then maybe call it from AppGyver, and then that's going to be a different URL, and you need CORS configuration to allow that connection. Otherwise, it's going to say you can't connect. It's a different backend. But one thing that that was recently added, if I go to the October 2021, very recently, is now for the Node.js runtime, CORS has been added by default for all origins when you're not in production mode. So if you're testing your service and running it locally, non-productive mode, haven't deployed it to Kima or Cloud Foundry, then you're going to get cores enabled by default. But the security, the coding challenge is how to add cores that you can control to your service. And there's two different ways that we can do that. If you are using an application router in front of your service, you can of course configure the in the XSApp.json, you can configure your cores configuration in the application router. So you could come here to the documentation of the application router itself. And if we just search for cores, then you can see there is a cores property that can be configured within the application router. And one of the security challenges that you could have is adding an application router to your project. Let's start a little simpler. Let's say for this first part of the challenge, we want to configure cores, but we want to add it into our Node.js service running standalone without an application router. So let's just go ahead back to our project, and what we want to do, I'm going to solve this, and you can solve this different ways. There's no right or wrong. Well, there's many different ways to be right. I'm sure there are some wrong ways to do it, but I'm not saying that my solution is the only right way here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go actually back to npm, because I don't need to write all the cores header handling and everything by myself. There is a well-respected cores module that provides a middleware for Express to add in the cores handling and configuration automatically. And because the Cloud Application Programming Model uses Express internally and even exposes Express to allow you to link your own middleware in, we can add this cores module into our bootstrap of our Cloud Application Programming Model project, and CAP will allow us to do that. This is one of the really powerful things about the Cloud Application Programming Model, that it's not a black box. It doesn't make all the decisions for you. It makes a lot. It makes it easy for you to get started, but it doesn't close you off from the underlying layers, like access to Express itself, or the ability to add your own or other third-party middlewares and modules into your CAP processing. So we want to use this module within our project. Oh, it's just named simply cores. So let's come here. I'm going to come to the command line again. It's just a little bit bigger. Hopefully it's not too big. And I want to add it as a project dependency. So I'm going to come here to the command line. I'm in the CAP folder, and I'm just going to do an npm install cores-save. And that will both install the dependency into my project, but then it should have also added it to my package JSON. There you are. It automatically added it as a dependency into my package JSON of my particular project. So now anybody else who installs this down the road, and when they install it, they'll automatically get the cores module as part of the project. Now, adding the module doesn't really do much. I mean, it's installed it locally. If we went into our node modules folder, we could now come here and find this cores. Yep, cores module has been installed, but it isn't taking part in our project yet. We need to hook it in. And to do that, more code space here for a moment. What we want to do is there's a special bootstrap approach with the Cloud Application Programming Model. If you create a file named server.js, and this is sort of the naming is the auto magical part here, right? Server.js. Then, and you put that in the root of your SRV module, then the Cloud Application Programming Model will see that and it will automatically know that that is a file that it needs to execute on startup. And what I've done is I've built just the starting framework of a bootstrap, a custom bootstrap, in the template project, just to help you get started. And all it's doing is it's bringing in the Cloud Application Programming Model APIs so that we can then attach an event handler. And the event handler we want is on bootstrapping of the Cloud Application Programming Model framework. We want to execute some code. Now, currently, it's empty. It doesn't do anything, but we want to add some code to it. The other thing that we see, the bootstrap event handler does pass in this variable called app. Now, app is your instance of the Express framework. So what the Cloud Application Programming Model framework is doing is it's saying, okay, here's an event handler that you can hook into to write your own custom code. When I start up, I'll call it automatically. You can do whatever you want in here. But I'm also going to give you the entire Express framework so you can go nuts and add whatever you want to it, change things. It's really a powerful kind of thing. But before we do anything here, let's, oh, how did I get all the way over there? My mouse is all the way over there. Let's just prove that this works. Let's just do a console log and the bootstrap. There we are. And let's make sure this actually does what we think it does. So save that. And let's go here and console, and let's do an npm start. And what we should see, yeah, it's running. We don't even need to execute it because what we should see is right here. The Cloud Application Programming Model, npm is running CDS start, which is loading, and we can see that it found our SRV server.js, and the framework is saying, okay, I found that. I'm going to use that as part of my bootstrap. And then we can see that our code is being executed because we see this in the bootstrap. We're just logging to the console. And then it goes about doing the rest of its work. It hasn't even loaded the model or created the OData services or anything like that yet. That will all happen after the bootstrap. So this lets us get in very early in the processing and attach things at a low level to the entire running framework here. So let's go ahead and cancel out of that. So what do we want to do now? So we're going to want to constant cores equals require cores, create an instance of that Node.js module, and now we can use Express, and we can say app use cores. And that, at its very basic, if we go back to the documentation here for cores, that's all you really need. We're not having to create Express or get the app instance of Express. The Cloud Application Programming Model framework is doing all that for us. It's passing this app into the event handler. So we're able to just grab that and tell Express, please use cores. Oh, I messed up there. I'm glad I looked at the documentation. There we are. And, if you read the rest of the documentation, now we could further configure this for certain domains. We could set certain cores options. By default, if you just add this the way I did to Express at the root there with the app use, then cores is going to be enabled for all requests by default. So we could go ahead and save this. We could run it again. Now, I don't have an external service set up here to test our cores. I guess I could have had another external service set up and ready to test that. That would be the next step of the challenge, I guess, to make sure that you're doing everything right. But we could come over here now and test to make sure this works. Yes, everything still works. We haven't broken anything. We don't really know for sure that our course totally works without an external website to connect to it to fully test it. But I've used this approach before and know that this works pretty good. Now, this leaving it without configuration is not necessarily actually the most secure option. You know, this will get you going testing, probably to make your application more secure. We've actually probably made our application less secure by adding it for all domains, is you'd want to really configure this well now and control the cores at the request level. You know, follow along in the rest of some of this documentation and set this for particular handlers or particular origins to have a better configuration of your course. But this gives you now the ability to control what's going to happen with your course configuration. Now, that's just one of the many security challenges that you could tackle here. I'm not going to go through all of them. This was just to help you get started. You know, we have some other suggestions here as far as adding authentication, access control, row level security. And in each of these, like I said, I linked over to some documentation, mostly from the Capire documentation that will explain how you do this in the cloud application programming model. And then you can figure out how to apply that to this particular project. The last thing that I want to do is show you, now that I have this done, I would say, I could say here, done, and push this back, commit all, and then push all my changes back. There we are. Now I've pushed my changes back to Git, but my cloned version, right? So if I refresh here, should see my cloned version. Oh, my dev container. 28 seconds ago that there was a commit, all done. And then I would do a pull request against the original, you know, when I forked. I could do a new pull request, and I want to do it against my fork. There's my, because I'm an owner here. There we are. I would go to my fork, and then I would create a pull request, and that's and please do. I didn't follow all the. Oh shoot, that went too far. We do ask that you do the pull request. Certain contest rules that you please make the title of the pull request week 4 challenge, and then put your SAP community ID in it, in the pull request title. That's how we know who to award points and badges to. If you're interested in the Devtoberfest contest aspects of this, then you'll want to be sure to apply that. If you don't do that in the title, then I'm going to have to come back into your pull request and add a comment and ask you to please supply that. But at that point, I won't merge the pull request because I obviously don't want to to actually change the template version. We want everybody to pull this, see the same, but I will use all the pull requests that are out there. I can see Marius actually fixed my one link, and then it looks like Lars also submitted a pull request to fix the link while we were talking. But you can see one person has already completed the weekly challenge, the week 4 challenge, and then submitted their pull request. You would do the same thing, and then we'll go through this list of pull requests. We won't merge them, but we'll use that to judge and award the points for the weekly challenge. So that brings me to the end of what I wanted to cover here today. Hopefully, everybody found that interesting, helpful. Even if you don't plan to do the code challenge, maybe you learned a little bit about dev containers or Node.js development and cloud application programming model development in general. I think that the dev containers code space is pretty cool. This is a great opportunity to try it out because we've got a repository here pre-configured for you to give that a try if you want. If you have any questions about the code challenge, you can also enter issues here in the main repository. I think we even I have a link to that here, how to obtain support. If you click the create an issue, it's even automatically going to label it and assign it to me and stuff like that. So if you have any problems, any follow-up questions, just create an issue here. We're happy to answer it. That actually takes us back to the main Devtoberfest, so that all the issues are together, but it, puts a title of the week 4 security on there. And I've kind of been watching the chat. I think I answered most of the questions as we went along. There was a lot of comments about code spaces are cool. It's a great opportunity to try them out. It's another tool in our toolbox, right? As developers, we love to play around with everything, right? But I think with that, we're about to the top of the hour. I hope this has given everybody a good head start on the coding challenge. We did extend it so that you have, let me go back here. You have until next Wednesday, November 3rd, to submit any pull request. At that time, I mean, you can still do the code challenge after that, but I will have pulled all the submissions and judge them at that point, and we'll award the badges and the points for Devtoberfest. And if you submit after that point, it'd be too late. You won't get the points, but you can still have the fun of going through the code challenge, right? Yeah, I think with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up today's session. Don't forget that tomorrow we have another educational session on container security. Kind of timely with the discussion of dev containers here. That will be part of the discussion. Very cool, very easy to get started. It can be a great part of your CI/CD pipeline, your testing framework. But how do we make sure that our containers are secure all the way through the software lifecycle? And then, of course, join us on Friday for our Fun Friday gaming activity. If you haven't joined the Discord server, I encourage you to do so. We'll use that to group up and find each other on Friday. Join throughout the day when you have a chance. The dev advocates will be on at a couple different points throughout the day to game with you as well. But you don't have to wait for us. You can form your own groups with other members from the community. Have fun gaming. The main point there is get to know a few of your fellow SAP community members outside of the workspace. So until then, thanks for joining this Devtoberfest session, and see you all soon.